Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. In the last few weeks, I've had a number of my subscribers ask me questions regarding how to resize an Ubuntu Server disk and how to resize an Incus storage pool inside of that disk. And although I've covered that on multiple different videos before, I really haven't done it in one succinct location. So this time, we're going to look at a couple of use cases and how and why you might want to do this. One situation I can think of is when you're taking an existing disk and migrating it to a larger disk. And another situation might be that if you didn't allocate all of your disk space, as I covered in Incus containers step by step, but you instead allowed your Ubuntu server to default the size of the root partition, but then you followed the rest of my presentation on setting up an Incus server, your Incus storage pool might be somewhat constrained. So let's take a look at how to do this. Here I have an Ubuntu 2404 virtual machine that I've created inside of QEMU. And let's make this screen a little bit larger here so you can see a little bit better. And then first of all, I want to do an LSBLK. And your device names might differ somewhat. On this particular system, I have device VDA, which stands for virtual disk. The names of your devices may differ, but VDA1, for example, is a alignment partition of only 1 megabyte. VDA2 is the EFI boot partition, and VDA3 is where I have my Ubuntu server installed, and the fact that it says Ubuntu-VG-Ubuntu and so on here indicates that this is an LVM partition or a logical volume manager partition. And again here under the type column you can see that. The disk free or the df command shows the amount of disk space currently used and currently free on your Linux file system. And so in this particular case, we'll see that the LVM partition is only 98 gigabytes, whereas up here you'll notice that the entire disk of VDA is 1000 gigabytes, which is 1 terabyte. Now, I could have also moved a disk over that might have been 500 gigabytes, and I might have used DD to copy that over to a new disk drive. And suppose this new disk drive was the 1000 gigabytes or 1 terabyte that you see here. Just because we moved it to a new disk does not mean that it would have resized the partitions. And in this particular case, you'll notice that we only have 98 gigs, and so the majority of the disk space available on this drive is unused. By default, Ubuntu Server makes the root partition fairly small, and the reason for that is because they consider the fact that you may want to create other partitions on the disk. Also, the Logical Volume Manager lets you extend to other disks. But in this particular case, we're not going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the parted utility, which is the command line utility version of the gparted that I often use on the channel. So I'm entering parted with /dev/VDA. And I'll enter my sudo password here, and then we get a parted prompt. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and extend that particular partition, and we do that with the resize partition 3 to 100% of the available disk space that is left over on this particular drive. And once we do that, we can go ahead and quit out of the parted utility, and then we can do a sudo part probe, and it will reprobe the disk to account for the updates that we just made. If I do another df-h command, you'll notice that the root partition is still only 98 gigabytes. And one of the reasons for that is although we have resized the physical partition, we have not resized the logical volume manager partition inside of it. To accomplish that, I'm going to use the logical volume manager command sudo pv resize/dev/VDA3, which will resize that particular partition. It's not enough to simply do the pv resize command, and in fact, if I were to do a df-h, you would still see that the size of the root partition is still 98 gigabytes. The next step we have to do is to issue an lv extend command to extend the size of the logical volume partition to use that space that we just did with the pv resize command. You would think at this point that you could do the df-h command and see the results of that resizing, but our partition is still 98 gigabytes in size. And the reason for that is because although we've expanded the file partition itself, we have not expanded the file system inside of the partition. So in order to expand the size of the file system inside of the logical volume manager partition, the final step we have is to use a sudo resize 2fs, where we specify this mount point up here, or this designation of the device, which is the LVM designation. Now that the file system inside of the logical volume manager partition has been resized, we can do a df-h, and you'll notice that the size of this partition, or this file system in the partition, is actually 982 gigabytes formatted. This particular system has 3 test Incus containers, and if I do an Incus list, you'll see container 1, container 2, and container 3. I can also do the command sudo zpool list, and as discussed on the channel many times before, this size of your default storage pool controls how many containers and what size they can be. So in this particular case, before we expanded the file system on the Ubuntu server, we had to have a very small storage pool for Incus, and that was approximately 40 gigabytes. So it's still 40 gigabytes now, and so our next step is going to be expanding that Incus storage pool. Before we can expand the size of the default storage pool in Incus, we have to understand where it's stored, and we can do that with the zpool status command. And you can see in this particular case that it's stored in /var, /lib, /incus, /dis, /default.img. And as discussed many times before on the channel, if we have a storage pool inside of a file, it's called a virtual storage pool. And in this case, since it's a ZFS storage pool, it is a ZFS virtual storage pool inside of a file. Before we can expand our storage pool, we have to stop all of our containers, and we can do that with an Incus space stop space -- all. And once we do that, if we do an Incus list, you'll see that all of the containers are stopped. As a reminder, if I do my df-h command, it will tell us that there is 982 gigabytes available on the root file system. And so I want to go ahead and expand my Incus storage pool by 500 gigabytes. And I can do that with the sudo truncate, and I can say plus 500 gigabytes, and I'll use that location that we had, which was /var, /lib, /incus, /dis, /default.img. And that goes ahead and expands that file. Now we have to get ZFS to be able to use the new expanded space, and we do that with the sudo zpool set auto expand equals on the default storage pool. And then the next thing we have to do is we have to bring that storage pool back online, and we do that with the sudo zpool online-e default and that same file specification. And finally, we want to turn auto expand off, and we'll do that with the sudo zpool set auto expand equals off on the default storage pool. Now, if we do a sudo zpool list, instead of having a 39.5 gigabyte ZFS storage pool for our default storage pool, we have a 540 gigabyte storage pool because we expanded the 40 gigabyte storage pool by 500 gigabytes. And finally, we're going to turn all of the containers back on or restart them, and we'll do that with a Incus start -- all. Just to confirm that all of our containers are properly started, I can do an Incus list, and we can see that container 1, container 2, and container 3 are running. Another way that we can look at our storage utilization in the default storage pool is the command incus storage info default, and here you can see that it's used 268 megabytes, but we have 522 gigabytes available. So just as a review, we resized the logical volume manager partition on an Ubuntu server and the file system inside of it. And next, we resized the default storage pool for Incus to take advantage of some of that space that we got by resizing the logical volume manager partition. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.